But
I don't, okay.
okay.
Good morning. It is April 9th, Tuesday, April 9th in Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. Our formal testimony doesn't begin until 10:30, but I have a list of bills I just wanted to discuss and get the committee's temperature on. The Crown Act, I just want to put everyone on notice. We have a possible vote on today. Senator Cummings might not be here, but is feeling positively about the language right now and could come back maybe at noon. But I'd really like to let people go at noon, given the tightness of everything else going on at lunch. Do people feel generally ready to take a vote after a half an hour of testimony, barring what we hear on the Crown Act? Because I'd like to get things.
Was anybody opposed that we're aware of?
No one is opposed that I'm aware of.
Well, we do have somebody who wants to be a witness, I thought.
We have 3 witnesses.
Oh, okay, good. So we're gonna chat about, we're gonna hear from the witnesses today.
Yes, we are. And then vote.
My only concern is that it's a very narrow definition of discrimination. And I understand that
Okay.
it's primarily racial, but there's a lot of discrimination about here that isn't just racial.
Sure, and one of the witnesses today, I think will speak to that. I think this is not just specifically about it being racial discrimination, but that no matter your age or other factors, if this is one that you could be 6 years old or 80 years old and you face a similar type of discrimination. So if you feel like there's other forms of discrimination you want to bring up next year, we could look at other forms of
It's very difficult, discrimination, because the word won't say that.
Right.
No one will admit that that's why, and again, I remember what I always told people in the corporate world about not hiring someone. I didn't hire you because I hired somebody else and then stopped talking.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
And it could be about hiring.
Discrimination against long purple fingernails with a glitter.
Right, or tattoos or other things. This happens to be a specific one where school children to professional adults are told change your
The
hair.
limited
Exactly,
is okay.
exactly.
I mentioned, I think it was to Wendy, it brought back a memory from the military. And the military at that time was, if you wake up in the morning and the hair on your face is longer than the hair on your head, you get a haircut.
Right, yes, right, and
And they
this,
adhere to
yes,
that.
exactly, and this has exemptions for types of
That's the other
employers that
kickback from the
are very specific, right? Okay, so we're generally, unless we get derailed, and that's okay, gonna take a vote on the Crown Act.
That sounds fine by me.
H 666, just a reminder that it's on the floor tomorrow. Unless you all want to have it postponed for a day. I'd like to keep things moving, Anne has other things that she has to be focused on as well, so we need to be sensitive to that. I would like you, when you draft your amendment, to run it by Peter Tucker and the realtors, because there are lots of, he was saying he actually thinks surety bonds are now less risky than flood insurance, in a lot of ways. And like, there are a lot of forms and
That's not
protections.
correct.
Right, yeah. So just saying, we wanted him to come back on that day, but we had the power outage and chaos. So just talk to him, to make sure. I just worry that we could make it less secure, by putting something in statute that's somehow changes what they would do otherwise that might be more secure. So just talking to him about that.
Yeah, and my goal is not to change the security of it, it's just to make purchasers aware.
Right. H121 data privacy. I am sure you are hearing a lot about it. Maybe it's just me, which is, which is fine. That's
There's nothing
there's
against you.
human shield for
I
it.
told you, the emails are pouring in.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
all form email though, it's not
Right.
personal email, and I
Um,
think if you ask people if they had read
right.
the entire bill, they
Yes,
probably none of them have.
When I read that form email, it doesn't conflict with what I hope we
None.
do with the bill.
When I talk to people,
Yeah.
personal right of privacy, a personal right of action
Yeah.
is viewed the way.
Yes. Yes.
I think as it stands, it may be, but I don't think it's a deal killer. I think we can carve out and make safe
Yeah,
harbors.
So-
I think we should start slow and give people time to adjust and see how it plays out.
Right,
With the exception of stolen financial data,
yes. Right, Well,
that,
the data, the ones who spy or sell data as their job.
no, they
Breaches.
steal my financial data or my personal data and set up
Right,
for the purpose of setting up. That's illegal.
Yes.
That's hacking.
right,
And we have a reporting requirement
Mhm.
already if your data is
Yes.
breached.
right,
So I would like to give
Yes.
our small businesses time
Mhm.
into this.
We've also heard ACCD does not feel comfortable with the bill writ large, but also doesn't feel comfortable managing the education piece.
Oh,
Well, they don't seem to.
Well, that's-
ACCD is Commerce
Community
Secretary.
development. Well, of course they don't have,
They don't have an education wing.
yeah.
So I just want to say, we're going to be looking at a very different version of the bill, a tightened version of the bill, tomorrow. We're gonna be hearing from some more folks with very specific concerns, like the ski association. The kids have geolocation trackers so they don't get lost in the woods.
Talking about ACCD,
Like that.
is, again, that same issue run into before, which ACCD is in fact a promoter and also a regulator.
Right,
There's an inherent conflict of interest.
Right.
We just got
Yes,
the final auditor's report on ED5, and
Yeah.
that again is a classic conflict.
Yes.
I wouldn't want to put them in
Right.
that situation again.
right, and they did not testify in Commerce, Senator Clarkson.
So I think this speaks the tension this committee faces. This committee balances the needs of business. We also are a promoter and in some ways as lawmakers, regulators, we also tread that very fine line. And we are in this bill balancing both the needs for businesses to comply with data privacy and management and encourage them into best practices. And we also have to respond and be strong advocates for consumer protection. So I think this is a classic example of competing goods where we are going to figure out how to balance those two. And I think we are going to get there. And we've had some very helpful conversations this weekend. We have some companies that can speak to us about this is already being solved in the private sector. We don't need to undermine what the private sector is already doing, but we also have to understand what the private sector is doing at the moment to help businesses comply and manage their data. So I think that we can get there. I wouldn't rule anything out, and I would just be cognizant of the fact that you're balancing these two big needs in this committee. And I just think let's keep an open mind and act on
Open
this.
mind, but let's at the same time recognize this bill is a monster bill at this point. It has incredible complexity. It has the real risk of unintended consequences, and we're approaching this at rush speed,
Yeah.
and that is always dangerous. Always dangerous.
Senator Harrison.
Okay, I see that where we're starting from is a position of inequity, like this much inequity. So it's not as if we're starting from here. The
Can you be
businesses,
more specific,
the-
because
the
the
tech
question
company-
is, well, the tech company,
the tech
but
company,
not every business that serves over 6,000 people in the state,
Right.
right? We need to get more specific about
Yeah.
who we are worried about.
exactly. Well, I'm first worried about the consumer, if I have to choose.
No, but who we're worried is doing something nefarious.
Yes, it's primarily the big tech companies. Some of the small companies benefit from that, even though they may not notice that. I'd like to hear the real harm. We've talked just generally, we've heard from businesses about how they don't want it, but I haven't heard specifics about how they don't want it. Most businesses, even the small businesses, use a vendor. They use someone else's software, which is already
But they are put in the position of
regulated.
controller in this bill, and they are liable under the private right of action. Should
Okay.
something go wrong with
Okay.
their data processor.
So something going wrong with their data processor would be a huge issue that they could blame on their data processor, because most folks, you'll contract with Microsoft, you contract with Salesforce. I mean, those are
Yes.
big companies. They don't make their own program.
You can blame them, but that doesn't get them out of the private right of action.
Okay,
right?
so regarding the
There's a small
private,
or mid-size bond company deal with Salesforce. So
Oh, But I think
they
we hear from
contracted
that
with
from the law school, from Nicole Keller and from some others. I think we should hear from
Right.
people who are managing people's data and how.
So-
But we should
The other
also hear from the
question of
small,
who- I'm sorry.
no, I haven't heard from small businesses on exactly what the issue is.
Okay,
Give me an example.
the reason
They
I'm
just-
bringing this up is not to argue about the policy right now, but we have 3 weeks. We have a full day of testimony on this tomorrow. We are hearing a new version of the bill. It is incumbent upon everyone to do their own homework after that.
Okay,
Get me 2 to 3 witnesses you wanna hear from, 15 minutes each max.
okay.
Because Senator Lyons, I wanna give her the courtesy of possession of the bill because there's so much about healthcare and biometric data.
Possession bill, like, okay, did
Yeah.
healthcare?
No. No, but I think that's a problem because a lot of this is about healthcare and biometric data and that can increase the cost of health insurance. So we are hearing a lot from healthcare providers, insurers, hospitals, and I'd like to give her a few days with the bill. That would be a courtesy. We might not get there, but I am asking that we finish our work on this bill by
Yes.
next week.
Yes.
So everybody has to do their own work by then.
Well, I also think we all have to hear some of the same.
So get me witnesses
So-
now for next week.
So I have 3 accounting firms that do a lot of this.
Yeah,
data
so we need to
management
narrow
for
that down to
private
one.
business. So I've got, and so I will get.
Macaulay one
I
of
will
those
look at
names.
these
Yeah.
and see who is willing to come and testify about
Yes.
what is already happening in the private sector to manage this process.
Yes, and I'd like to explore a little bit the alternative of using the AG's office to enforce, because they would obviously need additional resources.
We
for
have the
that.
AG's office coming in, right?
Yeah.
Again,
I know, but if the businesses are so worried.
I thought,
about
okay,
the
I
regulatory
should-
timeline, they could.
We should ask the AG's office,
For the AG.
we don't need ACCD because they.
So I'd like to know what that costs.
Fine, but
no, I would like to.
We haven't had DFR.
Continue.
not yet. Okay, so we need those two.
And I've got.
We should have the
AG's
AG's.
business.
Yeah,
Because
AG
they're the ones who
AG
don't
has
want
to-
privacy
Yeah,
protection.
so the AG will have it tomorrow.
Okay.
Chris is preparing for Wednesday. I mean, Chris told me that he was
I have,
helping the hard.
it's fine. It's what-
And you would
Yeah.
like the attorney general.
I would like the
also.
Attorney General, not Chris Curtis,
Yeah.
not, I would like the Attorney
Yeah.
General administrator.
The other issue was our 6,500 was extremely.
That is
low.
brought up to 25,000 in the
It's
draft.
a waste of
Up
money.
that.
So if we got
And the
that,
question is how does that compare with other states? It is
Yes.
so extremely low.
The other small states are at 35,000, New Hampshire and Delaware.
Mhm.
They have about a third more population, so I kind of went like, okay, we're 2/3 of their population.
It's not, 5% would be about 32.5. Just, if we're looking at percents of population, and which is what Delaware and New Hampshire, and Delaware did.
And this is customers, not transactions, right?
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
That
Should
was
make
my
that
understanding.
clear.
Vermont serves 6,500 Vermonters. And did you have a question?
no,
Okay.
There's
I
also,
think the closer we
So-
can come
Yes,
to everybody else,
yes,
the better it's going.
I hear you loud and
Or
clear.
we end up with a licorice situation.
Right.
yeah,
So Senator Harrison, we are gonna have the AG tomorrow. If you want a different witness for 15 minutes, send that
Alright.
to Macaulay. Cause
Alright.
we're gonna try to move this the week after this week.
but we'll have testimony after tomorrow.
We'll have one more day
Okay.
of testimony on this and then mock up. March up,
Like the AG for 10 minutes or.
More.
half an hour total.
No,
I think that's just for questions and everything. H55, I'm putting a possible vote, did I say Friday?
Yes.
I'm putting a possible vote on H55 on Friday. It does have a lot of moving pieces. None of them to this point have been significantly controversial. That's also a bill where the treasurer wanted to, I might give him some time to mention this today, hopefully.
What is it?
It's
H55 is
workers' comp.
miscellaneous labor now.
Oh.
It has UI and workers' comp and
Got a bunch of-
firefighters.
Okay,
So we're looking at firefighter language is the big change right now, and the treasurer would probably like a few minutes to talk about creating a voluntary private fund for baby bonds, where he can get private donations to start that process and give some proof of
Not
concept,
used.
not public funds, not unclaimed property. So that's the best vehicle I can think of right now is that bill.
Yeah, so would this be something that still the state would be managing with the resources?
That's a good question for the treasurer. That's why I wanted to mention it now, because he's coming in today.
I didn't know profit to do it.
Okay.
Yes, the state has this business.
So I just wanna make sure people are clear. H 829 is not moving as a bill in this committee. H 829 has
It's a housing
$130 million of housing appropriations. That's the budget conversation. I will be talking to Senator Kitchell and coming back in here to discuss our overall priorities, which some of which we laid out quite clearly in S 311 that fit within our property transfer tax framework. But I'm trying to get from others things in H 829 that are policy related that we could put in 639, but there's no budgetary pieces of that,
Right.
which is a majority of the bill.
Yeah, no, I realize it's the majority of the bill, but I would hope that we could look at the pieces that aren't budgetary.
We don't have time for a walkthrough.
No, but we could all
We could all
look at them
hear
and see
from
what
people.
they are.
Yeah,
So, okay, so did we do a walk?
no,
So, all right, so I'll just find
Yeah.
it.
at this
Page
point,
29.
I hope people know we're meeting from 8 to 9
Yeah,
on Thursday and Friday to do.
Eight,
Yes, because that's the only time we can get a walkthrough of 687 before Natural Resources votes it out.
I thought 8:30.
8:30 is,
I have 8:30
Yeah.
tomorrow, but
8 o'clock is just too.
Oh, I thought 8:30, we weren't.
We have-
starting
And on
at
Friday,
Thursday.
I have it.
I
do
know.
have 8 to 9.
but we have 2 hours with Ellen to look at 687.
What is 6:80?
It is the House Act 250
Act
bill.
250 land use.
Jesus. 2 hours to look at it?
The Natural Resources has booked her for the rest of the time
Well, is
this
that
week.
though, is that supposed to be the vehicle on which?
Yes,
And we'll have 2 hours to look at it?
yes.
Is
I,
that in total or just 2 hours to look at it preliminarily?
well,
To walk through.
that's in total before I have to take our feedback to the Natural Resources Committee. The three of us are on the next committee that it comes to. So it's not the last bite of the apple, but
We have her summary
Yeah, I
here,
saw that.
which will help us do that.
I'm supposed to be able to defend our position to Natural Resources before they take a vote, which looks like next Tuesday after today. I can't help the timing on this.
Awful process this is. This is an.
Well, we have just
Mhm.
half the time the House has basically to deal with our bills, because we only have 3 hours in the morning. That's our challenge. It's a really, it's a disservice to House bills, quite frankly, is the timing. We should have equal time. But we don't. We get the Senate.
I mean, this year though has been, this year and prior years, we've had adequate time. We've not had a situation on what essentially is the
The major
signature
bill.
bill.
Yeah.
From this committee.
Yeah.
And the notion that before it gets voted on, we're gonna have 2 hours to look at it,
I can,
if that.
people can take this to the pro tem's office. I tried to problem solve so that we could hear the walkthrough with Ellen as both committees. They just scheduled her all week to do a walkthrough, and that doesn't allow us to pop in and out in any effective way.
will we be able to comment after they merge the bills?
It still has another week in committees, and you'll need to give me your comments for Senator Bray about any changes that we absolutely cannot live with coming out of that committee. But I'm also of the mind that both the Finance Committee and the Appropriations Committee should have jurisdiction over every piece of the bill, because it has to do with growing the grand list and how much, like housing being a big source of the revenue we need to appropriate further in our communities. So I see other opportunities to weigh in, but I don't want you all to miss the opportunity to tell me what you think of 687 before they come out with combining all three of our bills.
Right, okay.
And I talked to the pro tem, and I don't know what else to do. We could take time in the evenings if people would rather do that. I doubt it.
We could go through lunch too.
We'd be taking Ellen's time, so we still have to run it by her. But
And many of us still have commitments during noon hour. as
Right.
well. I have tomorrow, also have on
I have
Thursday.
I have Thursday.
I could take this back to the pro temp and express the I mean, we could start at 8:30 those days and try to get an hour of Ellen's time that away from natural resources during 9 to 12. But right now, I have limited options and I have a committee that is not necessarily making this easy for us to look at 687 right now.
Yeah, it's hard to not share
Yeah.
one person who can
I know.
focus.
We need at least to be able to walk through it.
I know.
We could come back and let him go through the 5.
Would people rather do that
I would, that'd be fine.
than
with
8
me.
to 9?
On which day? Not
My
tomorrow.
afternoon
Thursday and Friday.
chair might
Yeah, I
have a
could do
little bit of a
Thursday.
heart attack, because we usually go to 4:30 or 5.
Well, everybody's having a heart attack, so unless she has a vote, I think, like,
I'll make sure my schedule is.
we need this time.
Well, all committees need time, Keisha.
Well,
It's not
I
just
know.
ours.
I know, but
So I'm,
I'm asking you to help me accommodate.
yeah,
all of
no,
our
I'm
committee
happy to do that, but I'm happy to do it after the work of
Start
the
at
afternoon.
8:30 and then do 4 to 5 in the afternoon.
Come back for as
Or
much time.
5.
At
or
least on
5 to
Thursday. Yeah, Friday it could be hard just because people leave.
Thursday is a bit of a challenge for me, but
What I'm
Okay.
hearing from the committee is that you wanna walk through the bill until you've walked through the bill. So, like, I don't know what that means for Thursday and Friday.
How,
So if we start at 8:30 those days, we're
how
getting,
much of it is relevant to us? Is it's all Act 250
it's
changes?
all Act 250 changes.
you have a start here in this summary, which is really helpful.
So,
I would suggest we just start at,
It's inside the folders and the
inside
And so
that,
The section by section is inside the folder?
Yes,
I'm-
there's the section by section summary as well as the.
I'm fine on Thursday missing going through lunch, the lunch, I mean, after
They're-
5 is a
again,
challenge.
because
yeah, that folder, yeah. Okay.
Well, 8, I'm fine with 8 too, I mean, I'm happy to accommodate, I just am not free much after 5.
Just so you know, Auditor Humphrey isn't moving for.
Okay. We have 3 minutes still that I would like to spend on some sense from, I do have to make a decision, and that might mean some people miss something.
Yeah, exactly, well,
I mean, that's,
So if, what it sounds like is we start at 8:30 Thursday and Friday. And then
they
we,
figure out how to make up that.
and then we start at 4 or close to it Thursday and Friday until we're done. Like
Okay.
4 to 5-ish.
Yeah.
But probably, maybe Friday we can move it a little earlier, I don't know,
Yeah.
Golly, what, I mean, you know, yeah, Ellen has afternoon commitments too, but I'll try to do that.
And she may not be available.
4 to 5.
So we'll start at 8:30 Thursday and Friday. And then we'd ask Ellen to come in at 4
If she's
Thursday.
available.
if she's
Right.
available. And then see how much we need to divide that time again on Friday, when she's available in the afternoon. So I guess if you can't get out of the ops, you'll just miss some things and have to watch the video.
Well, that's true for all of us, I mean, that could be true for,
Well, it could, 3 of us know where we are in the afternoon, so
yeah, but you've got big stuff coming to you.
we do have big stuff. I wanna quickly say for cannabis, that's a big bill. We are not giving possession to another committee, but I am asking ag to look at outdoor cultivation, and I'm asking health and welfare to look at medical marijuana, because that's their jurisdiction, and give us input before we vote the bill out. So if you have thoughts on that, you can liaise with those.
We haven't even talked about it.
Could the
This-
increase in potency be discussed by the health committee?
They will absolutely discuss
Okay.
it, and in fact, judiciary has feelings about it as well,
Okay.
so.
yeah, judiciary.
But I mean, you're welcome to have thoughts on it, I just wanna say they're kind of the decider on those pieces, and so you might want to talk to Ginny.
Okay,
That takes care of all the bill updates I can think of right now.
What number is cannabis, I'm forgetting what number.
I forget too, I haven't done a spreadsheet, but
Right, and I got that,
let us, it is now exactly 10.
because we don't have cannabis, our docket yet.
We do. It's miscellaneous something or other. I can look it up later.
I can add it.
It's not, I don't see it here.
It's not in
I
our
see.
docket this week, I don't think.
No,
Is
it's
it?
not, we don't have it scheduled for this week.
No.
Oh, okay, got it.
All right, shall I let the auditor?
Yes, please. So the auditor's going first and the treasurer's going second.
I believe so.
Okay,
I had expected the treasurer was all here, but you might be joining.
okay. Do you wanna check it with him? Cause you might wanna, maybe one. Good morning, Mr. Auditor. Can you hear us?
Yes, good morning. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good morning, Doug.
Good morning. I'm well.
Good.
Had a great day yesterday.
It wasn't
Yeah.
it exciting? Where were you? On
I
the golf
shouldn't
course.
tell you, but I shouldn't tell you, but he's out of town, so Michael Sirotkin let me sit at his dock.
Oh,
There you go,
perfect.
that's,
That,
it is a great spot.
that was a great spot.
Yeah, yeah,
Pretty, well, Michael missed it.
Yes,
that's
he did.
okay.
Yes.
So Deb, I think we have, oh yes, we have the treasurer on too. I don't know who wanted or needed to go first. We have the treasurer first, but you have the report, so I'm just gonna check in with the treasurer to make sure he doesn't have a time constraint and then go back to you.
To be clear, I can give you an overview in 10 or 15 minutes.
Right, and then it was today the day you also wanted to have a few minutes on veggies? Or
No,
was
I know
that
you
enough?
have I know you have other stuff
Okay.
to do. We can wait on that.
Okay. Treasurer Pichek, we were gonna go to the auditor first, if that's okay, just because he has the report, this
Okay.
retrospective report.
He's the author of it.
Yeah, that
Well
sounds good
done.
by me.
Okay, great. Well, I just wanted to make sure you didn't have the time constraints. Okay,
Morning, Mike.
thank.
Morning.
And Mr. Treasurer, I was also, when you were up, I was gonna give you a few minutes to talk about your idea about baby bonds. Since we have you, and we are looking at moving H55, a labor bill that I think it could fit into. So just wanna give you that heads up to kind of.
Yeah, great.
Ready for that. Okay, Auditor Hopper, back to you. I think many of us unfortunately have not had time to go through the full report, but we really appreciate that you did it. I think we've been saying in this committee for a while that there's a lot of new people in the State House who weren't there for this feeling that we were just all roses and rainbows in the State House, and that it kept us from doing our due diligence on oversight or asking as many questions as we should have maybe. And it's really important for all of us to keep these lessons learned on hand for the future.
Well, thank you. I couldn't agree more. Let me say at the outset, I know this won't surprise you guys, but for anybody in the general public who's watching or listening, we found no evidence of corruption within the major players in state government. And sadly, I think there are a lot of people, or some people out in the world, who think that state government was involved in, complicit with, or contributed to the biggest fraud in the history of the state. And as I said, we found no evidence of that. We did find evidence that better choices could have been made, but that's not nearly the same as corruption. As for the legal terms that were to be at issue in the case that was settled last fall, I can't really opine about that, things like negligence and so forth. But I'll give you some examples of what happened along the way and how this could have been a very different story. Indeed, it started, I think, unfortunately, without a fair understanding of what was being asked of the Agency of Commerce. As you know, the regional center was created and hosted by or overseen by the Agency of Commerce, which isn't a bad idea, but particularly since at that time, the SEC really didn't require the state to spend much time talking about or even thinking about the securities element of EB-5, and it was real. Now, in the early years, there was no hint of fraud in Vermont, but there had been a history over the decades with EB-5 problems in other parts of the country. So it doesn't seem extreme to me to think that ACCD could have considered a broader role at the outset, not just for themselves, but as I'll say in a minute, DFR. You know, the agency assumed its responsibility was primarily promotion, marketing, and the jobs data. That's about it. That's what they've told us and others. In fact, there was good reason to think that they could have or should have expanded their view of the matter and looked for the kind of help that they needed. They later understood that they did not have the experience, tools, or the expertise to manage the other half of it. There's regulation and there's promotion. And that's a theme that we see in state government, unfortunately, in some areas. So in any case, from the very beginning, I think we were kind of behind the 8 ball, although nobody knew there would be fraud and certainly not of this magnitude. As it turned out, ACCD did not even have written policies and procedures for the regional center that they created. So they were, I think, had they done that, which is sort of a best practice, they might very well, in the course of conversation, have said, you know, maybe we should think about security, but they didn't do that. Early on, or fairly early on, as we look back, there were 2 warnings that were missed. Actually, the first of the 2 wasn't entirely missed, but it led to a missed opportunity. And that is, as you may recall, if you were paying attention, and it's only 12 years ago, but there was a guy who came forward with his attorney who had worked with the JP project folks for several years and said publicly, I don't trust these guys anymore. I'm severing my relationship with them. And, you know, that got people's attention, as well it should. And the agency secretary, yeah.
Who said that initially? I don't have trust in
There's
these.
a guy who was a private sector guy from Florida who was assisting the JPEAK developers, you know, Kiros, Stenger, and Kelly. And he came forward publicly and said, I'm done with these guys. I don't trust them. I'm out of here. Now, in a subsequent meeting with ACCD officials, he did not give details, but he said, you should look at these guys very closely. There are problems. And in addition to the security side, he also said, I think there's $13 million missing from their accounts. Now, you got to make a decision as to how much weight to assign to somebody who doesn't give you the details in response to that. But what happened is the secretary of the agency went to Bill Stenger and said, what's the deal? And Stenger said, oh, don't worry about it. It's a business dispute. And by the way, here are some records that you can look at that prove that I'm telling you the truth. Well, as a result, the secretary was satisfied with that explanation and those records. But to me, due diligence would have required the secretary of the agency to say, maybe we need a professional to look at that. Because although a very smart guy, he wasn't an auditor or a CPA. And furthermore, the records that he was presented were from Bill Stenger and were not chosen by an auditor or a CPA. So that was kind of a missed opportunity. And at about the same time, somebody came forward, not to the agency, but to DFR, although it might have been Bishke at the time, I'm not sure, and said it was a relatively minor technical complaint, but said, I think they're using unlicensed brokers, or broker singular, I'm not sure. So that went to DFR. There was a brief exchange. There wasn't a lot of documentation on that. And DFR said, you know, we'll look into it, but they didn't pursue it. And I can understand why. It was a relatively minor thing. But had the agency and DFR talked together about it, they might have said, maybe this is worth more than just a passing look. But they didn't at that moment in time, which was too bad. Subsequent to that, the fellow who was then the director of the regional center asked the secretary of the agency if he would support him in a request to Stenger to actually do an audit, which was absolutely the right thing to do. And they did, and Stenger said yes. 4 months later, he said, I don't want to do that, it's too expensive, and they dropped the matter completely. And there's a reason, I'm not positive, but the MOU, the Memorandum of Agreement between, or understanding between all the projects and the state and the regional center were originally based on a template from the feds. And that template did not include a requirement for an audit. But that's the floor, not the ceiling. The state could have amended that MOU any way they could have negotiated it with the JPEAK folks, which might not have been easy because they knew what they were up to, but they didn't. So the agency, we believe, felt that they did not have the authority to force Stenger and his colleagues to do an audit or to have one done by us, which is too bad. I'm sorry, yes?
That might have been some hallway noise, honestly, like it's loud in the hallway, but we're listening.
Okay, sorry.
No, no.
The MOU did include a requirement for quarterly reports and quarterly meetings. There is no evidence that quarterly reports were provided until well into 2014, shortly before GFR got engaged properly and officially. And the quarterly meetings, we know from some of the email traffic that they occurred, but there's no records. No records were kept of these meetings at all. So we don't know what was discussed. And which is too bad, because while some of the early stuff did not jump out as infused with massive fraud, some of the later stuff did. So it would be curious to look at the records of those meetings and see why bells didn't go off, particularly for ANC Bio. But oddly, no records were kept. Very strange. Excuse me.
Can I ask a question there? Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah, Senator Harrison. You say it's strange that records weren't kept of the meetings. My experience, it's not a lot, but there are quite a few meetings where records aren't kept.
Well, first of all, these were only quarterly meetings. It's not like they were every week. And second, they involved tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And the state had lent its name to the regional center. So the imprimatur of the state is involved and our reputation. And best practice and due diligence says, of course you keep records. That's what an auditor will tell you every day. That doesn't mean it always happens, but that's what we say.
And I am not implying in any way that that is acceptable. I'm really disturbed at this, at what has happened. So I didn't mean to imply that it's acceptable not to have records. It's just when you said it was unusual, that's what I.
Well, and Don, these wouldn't have fallen under state agent. Why was open meeting law not able to be used, or no one followed the open meeting law? They weren't required to abide by it.
Because it's an agency.
I don't think they were. I don't think the open meeting law was at issue here. I'm just talking about the best practice, which is the state itself through the center should have kept records.
Right.
It wasn't inviting the public. The public may very well have been excluded anyway, because the developers undoubtedly would have claimed that all the material under consideration was proprietary.
You got room for a couple? Yes, sir.
So in any
Hi there.
case, I'm sorry, go ahead.
We just have some visitors. Are you from a particular group or?
We're the group from the Grange.
Okay, so you're coming kind of just to the State House, stay at the State House.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Welcome, Grange members.
Thank you. All the Granges in the state or?
Well, several.
Okay,
Those that still exist.
okay.
Our auditor is speaking to us about the EB5 scandal.
Oh.
And
Lessons
his
learned.
report.
So if you want to move your chairs to the side so you can see them on the
Yeah, you're
screen.
right. We
Oh,
know that
screen.
anything like,
That's a good idea.
This room back here, you can move chairs up there.
Please don't tell me they're leaving the room because they heard the auditor speaking, okay?
no, they want to get a better view
They're
of their
staying.
testimony. And Auditor Hopper, I realize we have you on tomorrow for veggies, so we'll definitely spend until 11 on this topic, so. Yeah,
Okay.
Senator
Thank you.
Brown.
A question for meetings that
So-
we're talking about. These meetings that were organized by the EB5 group itself, as opposed to any outside entities or any state entities that regularly participated in them?
Correct. But as I say, we don't know who attended or what was discussed because there are no records of those meetings. We also know, anecdotally, I think, but the records, I think, reflect this, that while the developers did show regional center staff and maybe the general counsel from the agency, who was also for much of this period directly involved and maybe was the boss, they showed them records at the meetings in some cases, but the state never took documents away from those meetings back to their offices, which is also curious. It just bespeaks a level of trust that turns out to have been terribly misplaced.
Yeah.
Also, at around that time, later in 2012, the governor agreed to allow himself to be videotaped by Bill Stenger himself for a promotional video. And, you know, other governors, I think his predecessor had done that, maybe not a video, but had assisted some of these projects, both in the US and overseas, unless I'm mistaken. And that in itself is fine. That's what governors can sometimes and do. In this case, it's very interesting. I mean, the governor obviously misspoke, and we know that. He said that the projects were audited by the state, and that's not accurate. But interestingly, the state did not find out about this for almost 2 years. And that strikes me as a direct result of their failure to keep records or to demand documents and information from the developers at those quarterly meetings. They could easily have said, please provide all of your marketing material 4 times a year. And the staff could have at their leisure reviewed it and found out that's appropriate, that's good, that's not, that's questionable, and so forth. They didn't do that. So,
And can I ask, Auditor, when you say marketing material, do you mean to the people who needed to trust that their money was going to create jobs, to the
I need to trust they would get.
correct,
right, yeah,
to the
the
investors,
basis
yes.
for the investment.
And as you would imagine, in any country outside the US, but especially some countries like China, where the government is so powerful and influential, if the chief executive of a state says we audit these projects, that carries a lot of weight. I think it would for people from certain parts of the world. I have no reason to think that the governor just didn't screw up, to be very honest. I don't think it was intentional, but the fact is the state didn't learn about it, or the center and ACCD, for 2 years. And when they did, oddly, the center chose not to put a disclaimer or a retraction on its own website, and furthermore chose not to insist that Stenger and his colleagues inform the investors or prospective investors of the governor's comments not being accurate. Very strange, it seems to me.
Did the federal authorities responsible for EB-5 play any role vis-a-vis oversight, or at least raising issues before this blew up?
Mike can better address that, but to my knowledge, the answer is no. EB-5 was very loose in some ways, and I don't mean in a fraudulent way or ways that would lend themselves to fraud. Although oddly, there had been fraud in years past in this program, so people, in my view, should have been more attuned to the risks, and that's what auditors talk about, as Senator Brock certainly knows. In this case, the feds did not require the state or any regional center, all of which were private except for Vermont, to address the securities issue at all, which is really curious. And I don't think SEC even got into it until at least 11 or 12, if not later. Again, Mike knows the details of that better than I. So no, Senator, to my knowledge, the feds, USCIS, had no direct involvement in review of these projects at all. They relied on the center. And of course, the developers in each case would submit information about supposed or purported job creation and so forth. But it was pretty loose, which is curious with so much money at issue. There was also a moment, another missed opportunity, which was really unfortunate, and I don't know quite why it happened, but the general counsel of the agency understood at some point that they were way over their head. When the securities part of all this became more evident as a problem, he went to the Attorney General and asked for assistance. And the Attorney General, not surprisingly, said, "I'm sorry, but that's not what we do. We don't do securities law. You need to go outside and get yourself a good attorney." And I think that's what he wanted to do, but it took quite a while for him to get the permission from the secretary of the agency to do that, which was required, of course. Subsequently, they got the approval of the AG and so forth, and they hired an outside attorney with experience in this area. But from the time the original request was made by the general counsel to the AG to the time they got an opinion with advice from an outside counsel was 20 months, 20, almost 2 years. So what started out as the right instinct from the general counsel, hey, I need some help with this, took almost 2 years. Now, I don't know what would have happened had they gotten the advice sooner, who knows, but it just does seem unfortunate and odd. So, in the end, the bottom line to me is the real takeaway, the details notwithstanding, this dual role that was assumed for the Agency of Commerce, marketing on the one hand and regulation on the other, turned out not to be a good idea. The Agency of Commerce does a lot of things, but regulation is not arguably one of them that they do well, or certainly not with the legal authority of DFR. And it's especially curious because when this started, there was a really good example of how it could and should have been done. And that is captive insurance, which is effectively jointly administered by the Agency of Commerce and DFR. But the difference was that from the beginning, nobody thought of it as a securities issue, which is kind of weird because it clearly was a securities program. And they missed the moment, unfortunately. So here we are. But the problem continues, as I think you know. There are some examples in state government where there is this dual conflicting responsibility. Agency of Agriculture, for example, is, largely its purpose is to assist and promote ag in all its facets. Also, however, they have responsibility for water quality, the allocation, the chemical use, and so forth. You could make a very good case that some of those responsibilities should go to A&R. The economic development folks are often conflicted. They market a program, but then they themselves internally decide who gets the money and why. So it's an unfortunate situation, but I will say the two things. Again, as I said at the outset, we found no evidence, and my staff looked at an awful lot of documents. We found no evidence of any kind suggesting that state employees, appointees or otherwise, were engaged in, complicit with, or contributed to this fraud. I will also give Mike his props, as they say, because once DFR was brought in, things started to happen because they knew how to do this, that this was in their bailiwick. So the pace changed, the tone of the relationships changed, everything changed. And of course, they had the benefit of working with SEC. So, it was all coming together, but they made it happen to a large extent. And ACCD, to their credit, didn't, not that they had the authority to, but I think when the governor and the folks on the fifth floor said, look, we need to change the way we're doing this, ACCD said, you're right. So, and then at that point, finally, things started to come together. But we missed a lot of opportunities. And I hope, this kind of thing obviously was probably not going to happen again quite this way. But, the agency, its mission is to assist the business community. So if they ever are involved in a program, either of their own creation, by you, of course, or not, you should ask hard questions about, is there likely to be a conflict in their administration of that program?
Right.
Now, nobody's looking for more work. DFR certainly doesn't want to be, the go-to people all the time, and they shouldn't be, but the question should be asked each time these programs arise. That's what we missed.
Thanks. So, Doug, and maybe so for those of us who were here, I will never forget the diagram. I think Mike, or I can't remember who presented it. Maybe it was Pat and Mike together presenting it in that press conference, that diagram, that higgledy-piggledy diagram of how this had played out, which was, do you remember that?
The spaghetti graph, yeah. I asked Mike if he had the original.
Oh my
I think
God,
that
that's
could be worth something someday on eBay,
I hope that's in your report.
No.
Hopefully in conference.
Well, I will just say, the 20 months to go to outside counsel just really hit me because my lingering question was like, I would go up to the kingdom months before the Digger expose, and people would say, hey, we're not getting paid. Something's really wrong here. It seemed like many people on the ground were trying to be heard and didn't know exactly where to go to feel like anybody was asking those tough questions. So that, I think, as representatives of the people, was really I remember I wrote to our chair when Allison and I were on Ways and Means, Janet Anson, I said, I don't know, this is revenue to the state somehow, so can we have a hearing, because I don't know what's happening. And it really felt like, oh, because this money is coming from a foreign source, we don't have to, and we don't have the jurisdiction to look at the securities around it. And that's, it's really frightening that we have that attitude.
Yeah, no, I agree. And two quick things without objection. One related to that point in particular. There is good evidence that a lot of people were contacting the fifth floor and others, representatives, senators, the governor's office, and so forth, about the situation, primarily at Burke, where there was things were actually happening, but paychecks weren't coming, contractors weren't being paid, and so forth. That contributed to what Mike can give you more information about, which was a robust conversation about how to deal with Burke going forward. Should we shut it down, meaning the state and the center, or should we allow it to continue and more money to come in to finish the project in order to pay contractors and workers and have an asset at the end of the process, which is a perfectly good conversation, and you can come out on either side of it, and we know what happened. But the second thing and final, unless you have questions, is in our report, we always ask the auditee, and in this case, we didn't technically audit the Agency of Commerce, but they, out of respect, we offered them a chance to comment, and they did. It was just a one-pager, but the commissioner said something that I had to respond to, or we had to respond to, because she said, and this is similar to what I heard from one of her predecessors years ago. In this case, at this point, she said the EB-5 created 6,000 jobs. And I can tell you, if you don't already know, and you probably don't, that the methodology for this that was established by USCIS is that investors themselves, in the first instance, have to hire someone, say like Jeff Carr, although he did some of this work, not that much, to run the proposal through an economic model, econometric model, and say, okay, for this type of project, in this case, perhaps construction, leading to a resort, skiing, and so forth, we invest $500,000 and ultimately say 20 million. How many jobs are expected to be created according to the model? And the models are pretty solid. But there are lots of different types of jobs. There are direct jobs. They're on site. When Burke opens, there are chambermaids, there are bartenders, there's all sorts of people, maintenance and security. They're direct jobs, but there are also construction jobs, which are very valuable at the time, but they are not permanent. Furthermore, all of the expenditures for a project, any of them at Jay or Burke and so forth, have indirect impacts. If you build a hotel, not all the inputs are local or regional. Furniture, although I think they made an effort to buy furniture locally if they could, which is great, and I applaud that. But lots of other things come from other parts of the country, other parts of the world. And the model will tell you that if you spend this much, there are fractions of jobs all over the place, which together lead to 10 jobs for each investment. The third type of job is called induced employment. And that is to say, all of the people who worked one way or another, either here or somewhere else, who received a paycheck related to these expenditures, they went out and spent that money. They paid their mortgage, they paid their car payment, they bought food, they went to the bar, whatever. They bought clothing. That also has ripple effects in the economy, which are difficult to measure or find reliable at small amounts. But in hundreds of millions, you can make some reasonable guesses. But for anyone to say that without more explanation that this project or this program created 6,000 jobs, I think is misleading, because I think for lay people who aren't in this space, think 6,000 jobs, that's really cool. Well, 6,000 jobs were not created in Orleans and Caledonia County, period. In fact, sadly, if you look, as I did, at the current Department of Labor figures and go back and see the change from 2006 to now, they have fewer jobs than they did then. And it pains me to say that, but that's the point. That
really, even
yeah, really, yeah, really.
Aspects of it that do exist.
In any case, I encourage you to always ask our own colleagues Where did you get that information? And explain it to me so we, our committee, and anybody watching can understand it.
Yeah,
I have one more question before we move to the treasurer, and others might too. Yes, Senator Harrison as well. ANC Biotech, you know, at some point it felt like I'm reading about this in the paper and just thinking, did we Google them? Like, do we know who they are? You know, like what was the due diligence that should have been done there to know if they were a legitimate entity and had other projects in the works?
or, yeah,
Well,
all,
Or maybe-
I'm glad to hear you use the phrase due diligence, and Mike, again, can give you more detail about that end of the pipeline issue, but the agency actually had an intern, I think, for a short time who spoke Chinese because they were interested, or maybe Korean. They were interested in what was going on over there because they had reason to be at that point in the process. They were beginning to understand that things weren't as they seemed. But, you know, when you look back at the ribbon cutting, these are smart people, for goodness sake. 2 US senators, you know, now a fellow who is follow on another US senator, the governor, public officials. When I first saw it, and I've been following economic development for 30 years, I thought, who are you kidding? You know, you think you can get this done in a place where there are no technical people in that industry? Why would they come to Newport? Which is not a knock on Newport, but that's not the way these things generally happen. You know, the Research Triangle in Carolina, you know, Silicon Valley and so forth, they are magnets for a lot of reasons, large universities and so forth. It's just not happening there. So if it were me, I don't think I would have gone to that particular ribbon cutting, but they did. And there were other points along the way where due diligence, in my view, would have argued for different choices. For example, the audit thing back in 2012 and so forth.
Senator Harrison has the last.
Okay, just, it's a big little thing. I can't find a report that's past 2020, that's more recent than 2020, just on the website.
On the
my
auditor's
website?
On the website, right, but there, it must be there, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
At the top of the page, click on reports,
right?
and then you'll see audit reports and then investigative reports, and both of those are up to date.
Okay, okay. And I guess just something in my town in Jupiter, Florida, we did have the EB5 program used in our town, but we were very careful to keep the town separate from the local agency who was what ACCD did here. And that really, that helped tremendously because there was, we didn't have fraud, we didn't have a situation like this. But keeping that separate, I think is key. And that was a place that was developing a lot, and we had all kinds of developers coming in promising the moon. And so we had some experience with getting advertisements that were too good to be true. So I think now that this has happened in Vermont, I think we will be wiser the next time.
I think every governor since I've been here has wanted to develop the Northeast Kingdom.
Right.
It's just seemed like such a great opportunity.
Right.
But I got a packet of information. I believe the woman was a nurse who had done the whole history of problems. I believe it was ANC Bio. I know it was Steros. I sent it to the Attorney General, who told me he sent it to the attorney from ACCD to be aware of. But that was early on. I got that. And
That was very early on and another missed opportunity, yes.
Right. So thank you for your work.
Yeah.
You're welcome, thank you. And thank you, Mike, for your good work.
well, you're
Yeah.
here.
And the kingdom.
Yes, and Auditor Hopper, you're welcome to stay on. We're gonna transition to the treasurer. Once again, we welcome our folks from the Grange. If you all wanna just introduce yourselves quickly, like your name and which grade you're from.
I'm Alice Daly. I'm the president of Blue Spruce Grange in Essex Junction.
Nice.
Yeah, I remember you.
I'm Janice Roussel. I'm lecturer for Blue Spruce and Essex Junction. I'm also trust officer for Vermont State Range.
Yeah, and we spoke about the Vermont Saves program, which loops us back to the treasurer who's here. So, yeah.
I'm Jenny Nelson. I'm a former state legislator,
Okay.
way back in
Oh my
97,
gosh.
98. And I was actually in the car with Bernie and Bill Stenger when we toured around all the development that was going on.
Oh my goodness.
But anyway, right now I'm the state Grange chaplain
Oh, wow.
and also am the ag and environment director.
Okay. Wow,
Still,
that's quite a bit of history.
Not for Senator Sanders still.
No,
For the
Because
great.
you-
I retired. and
Yeah,
thought I
you retired
retired.
because Will Stevens now has your job.
And then I went to become a farmer ombudsman following an
Great.
antitrust lawsuit for DFA farmers.
Yes.
So I did
Yeah.
that for 5 years.
Wow.
And now I'm supposed to be retired, but Grange is keeping me happy.
Yes, and welcome back.
Great, it's so good to see you.
But number one is, this all wouldn't have happened without that guy over there.
Okay, well, we won't skip over to the gentleman in blue.
Kendall Holden, I'm a vice president of Blue Spruce Grange, also happen to be the president of Vermont State Grange.
Oh, great. Okay, well, Blue Spruce Grange.
I'm Bill Nelson, I'm Jenny's husband, and our main business was, we ran a family farm for
Yeah.
55 years.
Yeah, it is ringing a bell.
So, and I'm the legislative chairman of local Grange and of a promoter page.
Okay, well, my husband's father was Clark Hinsdale Jr., who was a big part of the DFA in Chittenden County, the one who passed away in 2007. So,
Jordan.
Yeah.
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 He had my husband when he was 60, just in case you're trying to do the math.
I
But,
don't forget that.
yeah. Senator Cummings, do you want to introduce you want to go around quickly?
Yes, Ann Cummings, I've been here since Jenny was here. And I know the Worcester Rangers. I don't know if they still exist, but they
Worcester?
they
They do.
do a lot of meetings in Grange Hall. You know.
And the Dummingston ones.
Yeah.
Still.
Then I represent Washington District, which is right here.
Senator Clarkson.
Allison Clarkson, I represent the Windsor District, and good to see you again.
Yes.
So we worked working for Sanders, so it's just good to see you again. I'm the majority leader in the Senate and I'm vice chair of this committee, and I serve on the Senate Government Operations, and we have a few active Granges still in Windsor County, not that many though. Not as many as we'd like.
Phil, I represent Chittenden County and I've come to Blue Spruce. I'm sorry I missed your last gathering. I think I was pregnant then and I'm pregnant again. And I just didn't acknowledge this pregnancy. So I just couldn't get myself there, but I will be back.
I'm Randy Brock, I represent Franklin County and part of Grand Isle County, and I'm the Senate Minority Leader.
Wendy Harrison, this is my first term. I represent Wyndham County, where we have the Dummerston Grange and the Guilford Grange. Some of our Grange halls are being converted into community centers. But thank you for your work.
One of ours has been turned into a theater, which is in the
Nice.
Pomfret one,
Yes,
which is a great little theater.
I remember cleaning it out.
So we will turn to the treasurer, I think we've all heard that I asked the treasurer if he'd come in on this topic even before session started. And we got this audit because he was such a big part of making things right to the best of DFR's ability. So, hopefully it's helpful too for our colleagues and for us to remind ourselves we had good actors. We didn't activate them quickly enough in the process is what I'm taking away from the auditor. And so, we hope you can expand on that, Mr. Treasurer, as well as take a few minutes for baby Bob.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you very much, Chair Ram Hinsel. Great to be back with the committee. I think just at the top, I want to thank Auditor Hoffer and his team at his office that put together this report. This EB5 matter and the JPEAK matter, there's a lot of documentation, there's a lot of history, there are a lot of different organizations, a lot of different people involved. And they were able to comprehend all of those sort of details and nuance that, took us a long time in our investigation to get up to speed on. And just want to appreciate their thoroughness and the final report itself. I think it's a really useful tool for folks that were involved in the process and for legislators and for the public as well. I think the points that I'll make is really the same ones that the auditor made. We looked at the issue back in 2017 when Governor Scott came in. He asked DFR to sort of do a high level analysis of sort of what went wrong. And, I think the three takeaways we had were, we needed to have the right expertise, we needed to have the right resources, and we needed to have the right authority. And our point was that ACCD didn't have those things. They didn't have the right expertise because they didn't have an investigative background. They didn't necessarily have a financial services background. So there were things that, weren't picked up on that you heard from the auditor. The resources piece was also important. They just didn't have a lot of dedicated staff. I think at one point there was one person running the regional center, and I don't think that was even their full-time job. So there wasn't, a tremendous amount of resource put into this. And then the authority piece, when, as the auditor pointed out, when the answer was no to an audit, that sort of ended the conversation because everything had to be done voluntarily. At DFR, when we entered into an agreement to have a audit conducted by someone that we hired, and then they slow walked that and stonewalled us, we went out and got all the documentation from their financial institutions directly. So we had the authority to subpoena that information and collect it in a way that ACCD did not. So I think those three takeaways are important for this situation, but also for any program that the legislature was thinking about, making sure that there's the right expertise, the right resources to do it and carry out the mission effectively, and then that there's the appropriate amount of authority to make sure that that can happen as well. And, just maybe more of a broader point on the EB-5 program overall, we've given this a lot of thought about what is it about the EB-5 program that sort of created a number of cases across the country of fraud over the last decade or so. And, it's a program where your primary purpose for investing is not a financial return. Your primary purpose for investing is to get a permanent green card, to get that immigration visa. If you wanted to get a financial return, you wouldn't go to the EB-5 program. You'd invest your money elsewhere. So when your primary objective is not a financial return, there's not as much focus on the actual finances of the project, the likelihood of success of the project. They really are focused on, will the jobs be created relative to the calculations that the auditor talked about, and then therefore will my green card be approved? And that's what JPEAK was really successful at, and that's why they attracted a lot of investors, is because they had a basically 100% approval rate on their immigration petitions. The investors did. But again, when that financial reason is not the real reason that you're investing, I think that gets into some trouble. Also, the individuals that were investing, a lot of them did not speak English or from foreign countries. They weren't familiar with the process of our economy or our oversight or securities laws. And they didn't speak English, and not always were the documents translated to their native language. So it was hard to understand some of the details in these very complex documents, which obviously created another challenge. And then I think just the third thing I'd mention relative to the EB-5 program more broadly, when you're making an investment, if a bank is making a loan to an organization, there's a lot of financial requirements that they're going to have. If somebody is taking on corporate debt and they're issuing corporate bonds or raising money that way, there's a lot of requirements built into what that means for that corporation. If you're taking on outside investors, like in venture capital or private equity, or if you're trading publicly on the stock exchange, there's a whole host of requirements that either the government or those investors will require. Things like oversight and audits and reviews of the financial statements. And oftentimes there's close proximity to where those investors live and where their investments are. And those things don't exist also at the EB-5 program. So I think just broadly, not necessarily specific to JPEAK, but broadly, the program had a number of opportunities for this kind of misbehavior just because of the way that it was structured. And again, I think as it relates to Jay Peak, the auditor covered all of the salient points, but that expertise point, that resources point, and that authority point, I think are important takeaways for everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's so.
Treasurer Pichik, this is like my dumb question of the day, but does the program still exist at the federal level? Has it changed significantly? Was our experience part of any big changes? Like what's the takeaway for the, I never liked the idea of the program. I'll just say that you're, you're finding every resource you can just to become a US citizen because the rest of our immigration system is so broken.
Right. Well, it's so pay to play, which
Yeah.
is really so
Yeah.
yucky, right?
And the EB-5, I think it's employer-based. That's what it stands for, EB. And there's an EB-1, there's an EB-2, there's an EB-3, 4, and 5 is this financial one. So those other categories are different ways that people can immigrate into the United States. Like if you have certain expertise that we are lacking in our workforce, there's sort of a way to prioritize immigration. So this one, EB-5, that's financial-based. A number of other countries have a program like this, and then a number of other countries have stopped their program as well. I think Canada is probably the best example of a country that had a similar program and then ended up sort of ending it based on, I guess from my reading of it, I think it was based more on sort of what they viewed as the moral, considerations around the program and less about fraud. So that's, certainly something to keep in mind, that this is not something that was unique to the United States, but was something that a number of countries do and still do. In terms of how it's changed in the United States, there were a number of high-profile frauds, including Jay Peak, and that did spur on Congress to create some additional oversights with USCIS. That's the federal agency that oversees EB-5. So USCIS is more involved at various points during the process. There's more reporting to USCIS. They raised the dollar thresholds as well, so you have to invest more now to get into the program. There's more oversight of the regional centers. So the program at the national level still does exist. Vermont still does have a regional center designation, and that was something when I was at DFR that we fought to keep, because with that designation, we can continue to help the investors that are still trying to get their immigration petitions approved. We really think that's unfortunate that they're sort of the innocent victims here and not getting their immigration petitions approved because they had nothing to do with the fraud. And in many instances, the jobs that needed to be created, at least in the way, again, that the auditor talked about, those induced jobs and the direct jobs, were sufficient for them to get their immigration petition approved under the way the program was structured. So that's important to us to continue to maintain that designation, but there are no new state EB-5 projects. Does not mean that EB-5 could not happen in Vermont. There could be private developers that come in and use EB-5 for development. I think the best example of that in Vermont is the Taconic Hotel in Manchester was an EB-5 project not associated with the Vermont Regional Center. So that is sort of the lay of the land.
Senator Clarkson, and then
So how many of the original EB-5 investors have actually gotten their green cards and are actually engaging in one hopes further commerce in America?
And after hold on to resources so that kids could come here.
So that number, the specific number, the auditor captured it in his report. I know just from my own experience that a lot of the investors in the earlier phases, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the vast majority of them got their permanent visas. The ones actually in 7, which was the ANC Bio project, not because ANC Bio obviously was successful, but a number of those investors got to be put in another project in New York City that Mike Goldberg was able to coordinate. So they're on track to get their visas. And then the ones where there's the biggest gap, I think, is phase 8, which is the Berg Hotel. And again, we've been working hard, and we put together I put together an affidavit that sort of tracked every penny of the Berg property, because our point was that Berg Hotel was very different than the other projects in terms of there being outright commingling and fraud and misuse, and that the investors should get the benefit of what was actually created. And it sounds like USCIS is starting to approve some of those immigration petitions. So it's a little bit of a long battle, but it's been very slow. That's certainly the worst part of it. It's sort of moving in the right direction. There's still a lot more petitions that need to be approved to get anywhere near, the earlier phases. But there's still, I think, a lot of hope on our end that will get done eventually.
Thank you for not forgetting those folks.
Yeah.
It's easy for us to close the chapter and move forward, and if this chapter is over for all of them.
Oh, my God. No.
Any other questions for the treasurer on this, or we can spend some time on Betty phone?
I guess.
Oh, that's right. Yes. So
Cody Pro's office.
Senator Cummings is due in the Clinton's office. So is there anything you want to say on record about the Crown Act? Are you're as it
I'm
is
okay
written?
with it as long as it's still,
Yes, and it's gonna.
if we get out
Right.
no hair or gray hair.
Right. If we change the bill at all, we won't take a vote today.
Okay.
So if we will vote for bill as is. Thank you, Senator. Okay, switching subjects. Treasurer Pachek.
Yeah, well, great. Well, I know we had a conversation about the baby bonds program sort of more generally a few weeks ago, but we had a piece of legislative language in House Ways and Means that sort of was a more specific piece of legislative language. It would not have us operationalize or fund the baby bonds program, but there is a number of items, or like 8 different items, that both ourselves and the House wanted us to study in terms of understanding how the program could be operationalized. Things like, while you're holding on to the money, could it be invested in Vermont for the creation of new housing? Could it be invested in Vermont for other economic impact? How do you make sure the money stays in Vermont, even from a higher ed or jobs training standpoint? These are the kind of things that the House wanted us to study, and we think they'd be really important to study and to think more about as we think about this concept into the future. So we're hoping that we will get a legislative mandate to continue this work and study this even more. And then there's a second piece to that bill as well that would allow us to would establish the Baby Bonds Trust Fund and allow us to get philanthropic dollars and donations and the like to start a pilot project. So it would not be taxpayer money, but it would be private philanthropic money. And I think that would be a really important and interesting step forward for us as well, to have a small pilot project where we can understand how to best operationalize it, to try to get a sense of how does this program benefit families, even in the early years, well before the children have access to their baby bond. And then what kind of additional services can we provide to those that are recipients of a baby bond into the future? So I think they're important items for us to work on. And I'm hoping that that your committee and that the Senate will view it the same way and give us that sort of homework assignment that we want to have, and that authority to have a corporate or philanthropic or foundational money, participate in a pilot project.
We have some questions. Senator Brock.
Does the study that's being proposed continue to limit the concept of baby bonds to kids whose parents are at a certain economic level, or is it any broader than that?
Well, I think that's certainly something to study in the work, right? How best operationalize it, I guess, is how I would frame that. So looking at different income thresholds, looking at a universal concept, that's a concept at the federal level, that universality. I mean, I do think that would be great. The reason that the bill as presented didn't include that was simply, due to, the cost of trying to get everybody incorporated into the program. But I think we would envision, under that sort of concept of trying to operationalize it, how best and whom to cover and at what thresholds would be part of that analysis.
That's part of it. In other words, the study that's being proposed is not limited to the population that was contained in the original baby bonds proposal.
I think we'd want to explore how best to structure it. So that would definitely include what you're talking about, Senator.
Thank you.
What's funny, on the other hand, is when we did universal school meals, people said, some people don't need it, so give them an opt-out. I mean, you might explore it and find that, You just want a mechanism where people can say, I already do this for my child, I want it to go to somebody else in need. The treasurer knows that I would love if there was a mechanism where if someone didn't want their unclaimed property, they could donate it to this program, but that still might be down the road, so we can look at other mechanisms. We won't complicate this too much.
That's a good long-term mechanism. I think we're trying to solve the problem. The problem, there is a problem of gross financial inequity and how we break the cycle of some of the cycles that we're in. And so I don't think that it's necessarily a universal program, but it's certainly interesting to explore. I definitely think if our objective is to break some of those cycles of poverty, that we definitely need to focus it on a population that are that would need it the most.
Right. I think when, on the last public conversation we had about this, people really highlighted and felt good about the money that would go back into our economy as well. We are growing money, for individuals who would then have the ability to invest back in our economy and grow a business, have a house. And then they saw it as a great multiplier for the Vermont economy, not just the individual.
And that supports our educational community, whether it's certificate programs or full education or whatever, or an apprenticeship.
But at the same time, I think it's important that we look at where the money is going. In other words, what is the ultimate destination of the money, so that we are not taking Vermont taxpayers' money, even though it may be forfeited in the original design, and then using it to pay for things outside of Vermont that Vermonters don't necessarily benefit from, except in that single instance. I think the other issue that, as we've discussed, that concerned me vis-a-vis the source of the money, is that we don't, in effect, source the money from Vermont taxpayers and then give the money to those folks in Vermont who are not taxpayers, or at least their progeny might not necessarily be taxpayers. And that's the concern, is the source of the funds as well as its use.
Right, and it's still taxpayers, but the proposed source is unclaimed property, which is, a little bit like not directly using a tax source. I just want to make that clear.
But it is a source, though, that would in effect be a drain on the general fund if it were taken out and used for this purpose.
Right, so it's diverted
So that
revenue.
is,
It's just
again,
not
it means if the tax is there, it's still gonna be made up by taxpayers.
Mm-hmm. Right, I mean, I think the treasurer.
And we'll want to
structured it-
explore, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think I was just gonna say, I think we'd want to structure in the report and explore exactly how there is or is not an impact on the general fund, because our intent was for there not to be an impact on the general fund this year or in future years based on the growth that we're seeing in the unclaimed property fund. But I think it's worth sort of spelling that out in more detail in a report, in a study. And I think to the senator's point and both of the senators' points, I think, there's a individual benefit from this concept, right? The individual benefit of you growing wealth and breaking that generational cycle of poverty. But there also is a broader Vermont economic impact, which is that we want that money spent in Vermont to improve the Vermont economy. So I think there is that is an attractive piece of the concept. And I think to Senator Brock's point, we want to do everything we can to keep that money in Vermont, because that's the goal. That's the larger sort of economic impact goal.
So we're waving and thanking our Grange guests. Thank you so much for all the work you do and all the service you provided. Thank you, thanks so much. All right, yeah. I think I don't know, do people have more questions about this? I actually wanted to go to one more topic. And I am not connecting these two whatsoever. But it just got my hair on the back of my neck standing up when we heard this exciting new project in Killington that could create huge investment and lots of jobs. And we voted unanimously on H666, which allows these projects to use surety bonds to then invest the investor money into the building of the project. And I think if I may paraphrase, everyone's concern is what do we do if it goes wrong? You know, what should we have been doing in advance? I mean, everybody's talking about these being much safer, a very different tool. And I think it was really helpful to hear, you know, that different questions are asked when people are just looking for this job creation and a green card. Then, you know, you have investors on the ground who are making sure that they have a house at the end of it.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, is there anything you would say about escrow deposit bonds as, and I put you on the spot, but you know, as we voted that out unanimously, but still want to be able to go to the floor and answer questions that these are a more secure and regulated form of development dollars.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I think, you know, I guess there are a couple of ways to think about it is, you know, there is I will say from what I understand from the market that there is a real financing challenge in Vermont for build to own condos. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I think there's a significant interest in build to own condos from a wide spectrum of Vermonters. You know, people that are young, it's an opportunity to have a starter home. For people that are older, it's an opportunity to downsize. So that is a real sort of challenge in our housing market right now. So I guess I would just point out with 666 that by not trying to facilitate investment, there's also potentially negative impact of not having this kind of development. So just something broadly to think about. In terms of the specifics, you know, the other thing is either under the current system or under the new system, right? It's sort of left to the markets to police and to regulate. There's no oversight from a governmental agency. So even though the law says you have to have it in escrow and maybe there's certain conditions, you know, whether those are followed or not are up to the market to police. And if they're not, then to file a complaint with, you know, the appropriate authorities. So it's a little bit different than just the EB5 situation from that respect. And then in terms of it being an escrow or in terms of being a surety, you know, they're, you know, from a reputable insurance firm, there is really a pretty similar risk profile. The fact that your money is not leaving escrow, you know, there is an element of additional security that comes with that because you don't have to rely on the financial statement of an insurance company. But the insurance industry is highly regulated. It's, you know, quite a financially secure and sophisticated industry. So I think the risk is relatively marginal by moving to this kind of a possibility. And then again, I think that marginal risk is certainly outweighed by that benefit of trying to find ways to finance more build to own condo development.
Great. I thought that was succinct and helpful. I don't know.
No, I know that is helpful, and I'm not questioning at all the value of the implement. All that I am working on finding a way to improve or increase is the notice to the customer, because it is a new way of using deposit. And so I'm just working on finding language that would be part of the basically a receipt for the deposit, because this new way of using the deposit would be enacted upon the deposit getting submitted, which is a different time than the closing. So I'm just trying to find language to accomplish that.
I think the disclosure is important. You know, that the individual knows what the relationship is with the parties involved, and that they know who the surety is, they know who the insurance company is, or, you know, that they're it's a highly regulated industry and that they're of a certain quality in terms of their financial stability. I mean, those kind of things would certainly be useful to a consumer.
Great. Well, we should move on. Last question.
The issue of sureties, I know one of the things that we have discussed, how the individual who is the potential homeowner whose money may be pooled with that of other people who've also given their permission to the developer to use the funds for construction of an item, a unit, for example, a condominium complex they may want to purchase, of how do we provide appropriate notice to the consumer that the surety is there to be available to protect the consumer from loss. But also, how do we provide some evidence that that is in fact there? The situation that has concerned me more than anything else about this is that the developer provides a document that says that a surety bond is in place to protect each consumer who signs up. But how does the consumer receive evidence that that in effect is there to provide, to protect him or her, and that in the event that the bond is canceled, revoked, or the proceeds of it used someplace else, for example, for another consumer who served a loss and who occurred has in fact a loss, and there's nothing left. Should there, based on your experience, be some sort of a notice provision so that when the bond is executed, that the individual who are protected by the bond are notified of it, and the surety is responsible in some process for notifying the consumer who's affected in the event that the bond is canceled, the bond is lost, the bond whatever, and that his interest is gone. Because otherwise, based on how we have it right now, I don't see any evidence that the individual consumer is aware throughout the process of what could or might happen.
Yeah, and I think, Senator, I think one of the critical moments is when the money's in escrow, that the escrow arrangement say something to the effect of, this can only be released upon satisfactory, representation of a surety bond, and that documentation is provided to the bank or to the escrow agent before, as a condition of the money leaving escrow. So I think that would help on the upfront piece about whether it was actually secured, whether it existed. The piece about what happens as the process moves along and they have access to money, and then there's sort of this interest in getting canceling the policy, or the policy lapses, or whatever that might be. I think that's something that you'd want to think about in terms of notice, but also in terms of what kind of surety bond is being purchased in the beginning, one that would be required to sustain through the completion of the project. I think would be an important aspect of it as well. But I think that escrow agent at the beginning is important.
I think some guidance and something in the statute that makes this clear, I think, is essential. And I'm thinking in particular of the typical bond that you get as a contractor, or both private, in some cases, public projects. You execute a bond, and the organization that is recipient of the services is added as an additional insured, if you will, to that insurance policy. And the insurance policy, in the event that it's canceled or goes away, there's a requirement that the insurer notify those additional insureds, because otherwise the additional insured is not protected. And I don't see any guardrails in this legislation at this point to effectively do that.
Yeah, I think that's right, Senator. I think maybe even beyond just the notice, right? Like some sort of restriction on that being able to happen at all in terms of the cancellation of policy, because at that point the money would have left escrow. If there was a surety acquired, or could have left escrow, and then you're not just you're sort of standing on that company that can come through if things don't work out well, but they also have to be there when that happens too. So ensuring that policy stays in place during the duration of the construction, I think, would be important.
Right, and that's the issue. Again, the surety obviously is different than an insurance policy, and I'm not sure if there's such a thing as a quote additional insured in a surety agreement, a surety bond. At least I've not experienced that.
So I guess there's probably others that can speak to this more expertly, but again, that escrow arrangement, if the escrow arrangement said that there would be a surety bond to be obtained in the amount of, whatever was going to be leaving escrow to protect that person in the event that construction was not completed, and also that the surety, be required to be in place through the duration of construction, so that the escrow agent is looking both that there's a surety that exists and ensuring that it's not something that can be canceled, regardless of notice, but something that can't be canceled during the construction period is probably the most straightforward way I would guess of handling that situation.
So if I could suggest that we will postpone action on the bill for several more days or however long it takes. Mr. Treasurer, we really put you on the spot. I think you came up with some good ideas. I saw Senator Harrison write some down. If your team is willing to be a thought partner on this language and, you all can work on it in the next couple days. I see these as very helpful added protections that we can consider. Does that work for everybody?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Treasurer.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So we have 20 minutes and we have some guests and witnesses with us. We do want to vote. We, meaning I, want to vote this bill out today. I hope others do too, because we have a full plate. We have two witnesses here who I want to give a few minutes each to speak. Is it Dr. Asamoah?
Perfect, and I'm used to being butchered, so kudos and thank you for pronouncing it correctly.
Ron is still, that's okay.
Anyway,
Oh,
so thank you for being with us. Thank you for, it sounds like, being the original champion of this legislation and spending time with us. So the floor is yours as we move toward a vote right before noon.
Well, I thank you so much again for having me. I guess I should start by saying good morning to you, Madam Chair, and to the distinguished members of the committee and all who are assembled both in person and virtually. Madam Chair, I appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of H363. I will just note, as someone who was born and raised in New England, albeit Connecticut, I'm thrilled to see this policy, sort of being heard here in this chamber, and so I'm very excited. For the official record, I am Dr. Adjoa B. Asamoah. I'm not sure if I need to spell it. I'm happy to do so if required. You said yes?
We got
No, we haven't.
Okay. I should note that I am here in my personal capacity as the policy lover who in 2018 personally conceptualized changing the law that is now known globally as the Crown Act. I subsequently developed the legislative, social impact, and coalition building strategies for this movement, and I lead it nationwide and have done so again since 2018, not as a lobbyist, because I am not one, but because I like to finish what I started. The Crown Act is also my area of scholarship, as my dissertation in part critically examined the implementation of the Crown Act in schools where the bill had recently become law. So I am here before you today as both a practitioner and as a scholar who typically serves as the expert witness. As you may know, there is a long-standing history and problematic practice of racial discrimination based on hair. In many ways, anti-Blackness is pervasive. And while we all know that race, the way we discuss it, is certainly a social construct, racism is very real. And it requires a thoughtful and intentional and collective approach to dismantle those rules and prejudices and practices that reinforce it. There have been countless cases where Black people in particular have been discriminated against for wearing natural hair and or protective styles, including but not limited to braids, locks, twists, bantu knots, and in some cases, afros. This prevalent form of discrimination includes being fired, passed over for promotions, and even having offers of employment rescinded. It impacts the upward mobility of the individuals and the families, and it has been the reason that far too many children have missed school or had negative educational experiences. In recognition of the time limit, but to just lift a few, I share the name of Faith Finity. In Louisiana, a student, beautiful girl who was sent home in tears because she wore beautiful braids that were deemed a violation of school rules. DeAndre Arnold, who I had the pleasure of testifying alongside in Texas, was told that he could not participate in his high school graduation ceremony with his friends because he wore locks, which for him was a display of racial and ethnic pride. In the same school district, Darrell George, a student, has been in in-school suspension since August of last year because he is unwilling to cut his locks that are protected by statute under the Crown Act. I had him and his mom here with me recently, join me in DC, and they attended the State of the Union, visited the White House, met some members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and literally had a ball, but most importantly, left reassured that we would win this battle. People representing many races and ethnicities across the world, I think, collectively gasped witnessing Andrew Johnson, a student wrestler in New Jersey, who was forced to make a decision no person should have to make, and certainly not a child. And that was to have his locks cut by someone with no regard for them and his identity attacked, or to forfeit a match he had earned the right to participate in based on talent and practicing. Purportedly race-neutral grooming and dress code policies in the workplace that reinforce a Eurocentric image and standard of professional hair are problematic. Eurocentric beauty standards that continue to perpetuate unfair, unequitable, and unjust in workplaces and schools, most often against Black people for wearing hairstyles that are in alignment with their racial identity are as well. This issue warrants a legislative fix. The Crown Act is that fix. H363 will outlaw race-based hair discrimination by extending statutory protection to both hair texture and protective styles. I wear quite a few hats, or dare I say crowns, and I lift one more only because it is applicable. I am also a former adjunct psychology professor who is still a licensed clinician and started in K-12 education. And I share that only because I know the harm negative school climate and culture can do to a child. The psychological impact of being told the way you were born, the way you look is not okay, is something no person should ever have to endure, especially our babies. By now, you may have come across the NIH study noting there is a correlation between the use of chemical relaxers and the increased likelihood of developing uterine fibroids and cancer. The data are clear. There are physical, psychological, and economic impacts here. There is so much more I would like to share, but my time is coming to an end. So I will simply note this is my brainchild, and of course I am passionate about it. I am simply working to protect and preserve our rights to rock our crowns how we see fit, whether it's natural, meaning without chemicals, but blown out like mine is today, or curly like mine was last week, or in the twist that I plan to have next month. I thank the many sponsors for their leadership in championing this effort in Vermont and for having me. On behalf of the many 501c3 and C7 organizations I brought into the Crown Coalition as the co-creator, I ask you to vote favorably. I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you, Dr. Asamoah. I'm just going to ask if you could stay till noon when we vote in case questions come up, but we'll hear from our other two witnesses quickly so that we can get to the vote. But that was very comprehensive. I don't see any burning questions. It was great, and I can see why you got your doctorate. This was a very impressive topic.
Thank you.
Let's just go to, we really are running low on time because you want to.
Oh, we are. We have caucus.
So our next witness is Joseph Jacobson from Middlebury College.
Good morning, everyone.
And again, you have 3 minutes.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi.
Thank you, everyone, for having me here. Thank you, Dr. Asamoah, for that testimony. I really appreciate it. I find that argument very compelling. My name is Joseph Jacobson. I'm a student at Middlebury College. I'm 19 years old. I'll probably be majoring in philosophy and political science. And I am here partially representing a club at my school that I'm a part of, Civics in Action. And it is a club about getting fellow students to participate in civics and participate in getting involved with local government, state government. And part of the thing we do is that we invite students to try to testify on bills that they are passionate about. Now, I am representing my own beliefs here today. I just want to make that clear, but I feel like what I'm doing is part of trying to encourage other students to do the same for bills that they're passionate about. I want to bring a little bit of a different sort of, I guess you could say, experience or a different perspective on this issue. I'm not African American, and I feel that there's a lot of other different hairstyles that also should be included in this bill, and I feel like the bill is representative of them. I just want to emphasize those. I am a guitarist. I have a business that I do related to guitars and music, and as you can see, I am a big fan of long hair. And I want to make this bill also kind of as a staple of free expression as well. Because there's people like to have their hair in certain different ways, and I don't think my hair should really impact my employment and how other people's perceive me. I don't feel like my hair has any impact on my intelligence. I don't feel like hair has any impact on how I can conduct a job, conduct responsibilities, communicate with other people. And I feel like in general, hair is an expression that should be protected. And I feel like this bill does a great job of doing that. And I feel like I want to encourage other people around my campus, because at Middlebury, a lot of people have long hair. And I see a lot of different people around campus doing a lot of different activities of all different races, of all different types of people. And I think it's important that all different hairstyles, including long hair, just in general, dreads, any sort of expression is very important. So I just wanted to emphasize that here today. Because,
Yeah.
can I have 1 minute, please? No, I just wanted to say, just in conclusion, I think it's very important that no matter what type of thing we do in our personal lives, our right to have employment is preserved. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for your work with Civics in Action. It's great. Professor Crystal Brown, also at Middlebury College.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Dr. Asamoah, thank you so much for your amazing testimony. Thank you, Joseph. It's good to see another student here. To the members of the committee, I just want to say, first of all, I'm here because Ruth asked me to come and check in about this particularly sentimental moment for me. Politics is something that I grew up with. My mother was a local politician, and I always believed that the more personal we make politics, the more progress we will make. So I'm excited to see this bill. Let me tell you why the Crown Act is important to me. I am a native Southerner. I'm from North Carolina, and I'm gonna keep my accent to myself to make sure that the record can be translated. But what that really means is that I grew up with Blackness in its own environment, right? And in New England, in Vermont specifically, we don't see African-American culture in a what I would love to call native environment. There is not a lot of affinity or amenities that are created outside or inside of Vermont for African-American culture. I am the proud mother of a 13-year-old boy, and he looks like this. He just happens to be home for spring break. And his hair and his journey.
What's your name?
Hi, I'm Gabriel Greer.
Hi, Gabriel. Did you get like 2 eclipse days? Is that how come you're lucky enough you got 2 eclipse days?
Oh, we're gonna get to that. Let me just tell you. So Gabe is 13. He'll be 13 for 4 more days. He has been in school in Vermont since he was in the 2nd grade. And so a large part of what I think this bill does is it takes the education that it takes to get into the workplace and take that education of the workplace and give it back to a primary educational setting, right? So my son was probably the only young African-American male in his class for most of his educational career until this year when he moved to boarding school in Philadelphia. What that means is for most of his educational life, he has been the only, and I have been a professional development consultant for most of his classroom teachers. And that starts with not only what he looks like, but how his identity is different than what comes into most Vermont classrooms. And that was a big deal about growing out his hair, right? Because people would say, oh, when are you going to take those braids out? And just knowing the difference between a lock and a braid is an educational cultural competency, right? And so when we think about the Crown Act, it's about education and it's about understanding the whole picture. Thank you, lovely. He's out because he doesn't go to school in Vermont.
Yeah.
Gabriel's birthday is
birthday.
I'm sorry?
When's his birthday?
His birthday's gonna be on Saturday. Yep, he'll be 14 on the 13th.
I
Yeah.
have a 1-year-old, his birthday
Yeah.
is on Saturday.
So the other, it's Aries season. The other part about that, about what we're doing in terms of the Crown Act is that locks have been, negatively thought of as dirty. They've been thought of as a way of not being having good hygiene. I had locks for 8 years. When I moved to Vermont, I had locks, and when I first started teaching at the college 15 years ago, I had locks. And then as I transitioned into my current hair state of, life transitions, that's another thing that we can kind of put in the background of the Hair Act, is that life transitions are marked, especially between Black women, by what you're doing with your hair, right? And the identity that we create in doing that is a part of our freedom. I've been getting my hair done. My first job was at a hair salon, taking out rollers and listening to women older than me give me life lessons about how to be a woman. What we miss in the Hair Act is that we are now talking about relegating what someone looks like from the culture that they're learning about, from the identity that they get to practice. And in the Americas, as we see it as a effect of post-traumatic slave disorder, identity and freedom have been categorized as a version of success. And as we are telling people what success looks like, we're telling them that what they look like is not successful. And we can see beyond this in an academic setting. I'm the first African-American woman to be tenured at Middlebury College, and that happened in 2018. So we have so far to go in terms of the expansion of what success looks like. And when I first started teaching at Middlebury, there was such a gap between what students wanted to look like and the ability to do that. So hair in the Black community is also a sign of what my grandfather would call keeping your shoes clean. And if you understand African-American culture, Black people have often turned their exterior into something wonderful because their exterior from other people's perspective was being broken down. And so we see the hair industry in America as $1 trillion industry because it is one of the few places where no matter what your socioeconomic status is, as a Black person, you still go get your hair cut at the barbershop. You still go get your hair done. You get it twisted, braided, tracked, box braided, glued, whatever you want to do, because it changes how you feel about yourself. Black students at Middlebury have not always had that opportunity. So I have cut hair in the men's dressing room. I have started hair pop-ups where I fly my hairdressers in from North Carolina, from Atlanta, and we take over 2 small beauty salons here in Middlebury, Vermont, and we do the hair of the students, right? We allow them to have that experience here. We've now tried to open up a salon station on campus that allows students to bring in braiders and other people, but the actual industry, the actual affinity or ability to schedule a hair appointment in Vermont for people of color is still almost a hurdle, right? And if you don't have that ability to pay for it or try it out on your own. Or if you don't have a visual about what that might look like as a real person, that is where the Crown Act comes into play, because the more we are able to share ourselves, our full authentic selves in every workplace, the more young people, people of color, and people who are allies are able to understand the process of hair, the purpose of hair, and the beauty of what this culture has to offer. So thanks for letting me jump on my soapbox. Thank you again, Dr. Asamoah. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Professor Brown. And we're glad you're here for this moment too, right? For us, this is, you know, for me, I'll speak for myself. It's just, it's been made very concrete. You know, it's great to know you are here and that you know, this does benefit Vermonters who want to stay here and their children. So really appreciating that. We will now take a vote, hopefully.
Yeah, whole workforce opportunity here, which is puzzling.
That as well. And thank you for everything you do to make Middlebury students feel more welcome and have their hair taken care of, because that is its own next step. You know, as everyone said, we hope this is educational and helps people know that this is a really big part of validating someone's full self and letting them bring their whole self to the table. So with that, we will take a vote on the bill as it was given to us by the House. Does anyone want to make a motion?
I move that we favorably H363, an act relating to prohibiting discrimination based on certain hair types and styles.
And without any changes, we have a yes from Senator Cummings.
Well, she can't technically, but unless she.
She said, well, she said on the record that she was, but as chair, I can accept.
Right. Kind of
Okay,
unusual, but there we are.
so I will call the roll. Senator Brock,
Yes.
Senator Clarkson,
Yeah.
Senator Cummings, I'm gonna mark as a yes. Senator Harrison is a yes. Senator Rob Hinsdale.
Yes.
Wonderful. So, Madam Chair, the vote is 5-0-0.
Wonderful. That's a unanimous vote. Is there anybody who would, I wrote some notes and this testimony has very much helped me, so I can, we can report this bill, you know, in words that reflect yours with credit. Does anybody want to report this bill? Certainly busy enough.
I think even the driving force behind the bill, I think you should report it.
There's always some flattery involved in this. Senator Harrison, you look like you.
No, I think it's a great bill.
Okay.
I think you should.
Okay, so I will report the bill and really appreciate and we'll be, you know, crediting you all with the language, just everything you've said today, from the chemicals, linking, you know, that it has a health impact to, you know, it has an educational and economic impact, that it isn't race neutral. Definitely wrote down PTSD, post-traumatic slave disorder. I'm not sure what I will do with that, but took that note. So thank you. You know, and just giving you credit, Dr. Asamoah, from, you know, your 2018 work that has blossomed around the country. Dr. Asamoah, do you want to have the last word? We welcome that.
No, I do not need to have the last word. I do just want to share how thrilled I am to be able to provide testimony with these two amazing people from this college. I do just have to note that while I personally support the freedom of expression in many ways, of course, with our hair, that this is about racial discrimination. So it's not just hairstyles. It is about extending statutory protection to our hair based off of the existing classification of race. So it's not just about freedom of expression, it's about racial discrimination. So I just wanted to make that clear, because sometimes people think that the Crown Act is more than it is. And so I just wanted to clarify that this is not about, you know, lime green ponytails or, you know, any of the other things, which again, personally support, but it is about racial discrimination in particular and outlawing that. So I just had to share that in light of the testimony.
Right. Yes. And as the founder, thank you for being the one, you know, to articulate and uplift that. Other people could introduce other bills, you know, Joseph, you can always sort of keep working on those other issues.
Joseph, you and I are gonna work. White hair also discriminated against. So we'll do a different discrimination bill.
Right. And those are rooted in other things. So to have this bill, you know, specific. to what you saw and wanted to uplift around the country is much appreciated. And it really is, I think, another way to be welcoming to Black Vermonters and to educate people about, as I really think Professor Brown said it quite well, you know, if already it was hard to get your hair done in the pandemic, you know, without traveling to Montreal or Boston or whatever, it became very impossible for Black women, and that cultural exchange gets lost. A lot of other things get lost that exists in I think many women know that to be true, regardless of race, but it is so much more rare to be able to find that community in Vermont. And so to really uphold that and recognize that as its own unique challenge is really valuable and appreciated.
And National Public Radio did a great piece on the cancers coming out of the parent chemicals. So
Yes.
we should find the
Right.
National Public Radio piece on that
I'll
because
make a
that
note of that.
is super useful for your floor report.
Okay,
Thank
thank you
you
all
all.
so much.